When I said Unifi 9 was a game changer for the Unifi Firewall offering, I meant it. There's only so much testing that can be done in a lab, so I finally did it. I moved my pfSense firewall to Unifi. In this video, I will go over the migration process and talk in depth about the real-world use case of my new UDM Pro Max firewall and what I like and what I don't like, but overall, that process for getting from pfSense to there and where they're going with it in the future, because there's a few things on the roadmap that I've tested in the new version, but I wanted to really test what it looks like right now today and put it in production with the official releases. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Are you an individual or forward-thinking business seeking expert assistance with network engineering, storage, or virtualization projects? Maybe you're part of an internal IT team that needs to proactively manage, monitor, and secure your technology. We offer comprehensive consulting services tailored to meet your specific requirements. Whether you need fully managed or co-managed IT services, our team is ready to help you. We specialize in supporting businesses that require IT administration or teams seeking an extra layer of support to enhance their operations. Our install team is ready to assist you with all of your structured cabling and Wi-Fi planning needs as well. To learn more about any of our services, head over to lawrencesystems.com, fill out the Hire Us form, and let us start crafting the perfect IT solution for you. If you want to show some extra love for our channel, check out our swag store with shirts, hats, desk accessories, and more. We also have affiliate links down below that'll get you discounts and deals on products and services we talk about on this channel. With the ad read out of the way, let's get you back to the content that you came here for. Now, the model I'm using is a Unifi Dream Machine Pro Max, or UDM Pro Max for short. The system runs the quad-core ARM Cortex processor, has 8 gigs of RAM, 32 gig eMMC, but the integrated 128 gig SSD is also used for storing logs and lots of the advanced features. It does have 8 gigabit RJ45 ports, one 10 gig SFP plus port, one 2.5 gig WAN, and a 10 gig WAN as well. So you have the option for SFP or RJ45 for your WAN, and it does support dual WAN. Now, the system is cooled with a built-in fan. It's actually extremely quiet. I've never really heard it, so I didn't even bother doing a sound measurement because it's pretty much silent, but it does have active cooling. I will mention I have tested the IDS IPS throughput. It says 5 gigs when it's got all that turned on, but I found it to be maybe just slightly under 5 gigs, about 4.5, 4.4, kind of varied a little bit depending on how many streams you use, testing with something like iPerf. But overall, I think that's adequate for the system. I had no problem getting full line speed, of course, when I turned that off when I was going inter-VLAN routing, because my internet connection doesn't happen to be 10 gigs, so I wasn't testing it with the internet. But I think this is reasonable for this system. I think it's worth noting that it only idles at about 20 watts as well. Now, today I'm only focusing on the firewall, but the Unifi Dream Machine does have the built-in controller, does support all of these other features such as protect, access, talk, and connect. So you can actually expand this to have more features, which is also one of the reasons I chose this model, because I will be doing some future videos showing how the access system works. I don't really use phones enough, so I don't know if I'll ever cover talk, but I wanted to play with some of the other features that are in here. Having the controller built in is actually quite convenient as well. And by default, it does have auto update turned on, just like the other smaller models that I've talked about before. Now I want to start with highlighting the versions right here. The UDM Pro Max, the base OS for the console, is 4.1.13, and the Unifi Network is 9.0114, and these are both what's available here in February of 2025. Now, because this is a migration, I want to talk about migrating a self-hosted controller. We're going to go over here to System, Backups, and there's a Restore option right here. This is what allowed me to import my already existing Unifi setup, which I did not want to have to reset up all my switches. So this allows you to extract a single site out of the self-hosted controller. So that is something that works. I was really happy to learn that, because if you were to look at the Unifi devices as I have them set up and you were to go to the port manager, I have everything labeled. I have all of these adopted. So being able to move from a self-hosted controller to an individual system is great. Now, something of note, the system does not support multi-instances. So this only allows you to have one site. So if you're using a self-hosted controller, it will ask you to pick the site if you're using multiple sites and bring that site in for part of the backup. So when you do that restore, It has you choose the file, it'll have you bring it in, but it only lets you pick one site because multi-site management is not supported in this. Something else of note, if you have done any configuring on your Unifi Dream machine, it will wipe all of those settings out because you're restoring from a backup that does not have any settings from that. It only has all the switch settings. So this is best done when you have all of your devices adopted into a controller, but don't have any configuration done on a Unifi Dream machine because, as I said, it will wipe it. Now let's talk about getting settings out of pfSense and into Unifi. There's no import-export tool that I'm aware of that anyone has built that will do this, and that makes things a little bit tedious. For example, I have DHCP reservations across all my networks. So I'd like to, even if I set the device as a static IP, I add a DHCP reservation, and I still do this with Unifi. The reason for it is if I ever have to reset or reload that device, it will get an IP address, and I want it to have the same IP address that will be statically assigned to it. So it always keeps those very clear as to where they are. In Unifi, well, they don't have any way to import at all a group of DHCP addresses. Not that there's an official way to do it with pfSense. The way I would do it was just modifying an XML file, but you can go through and copy and paste and pre-add all the clients. So actually, after I imported the site, I went ahead and added each one of these MAC addresses, the device name, and the fixed IP address. So I was building all of my DHCP reservations ahead of time. I didn't find any easier way around this. So if you're someone like myself who has a lot of reservations, this is the methodology by which you can get this pre-set up essentially. Now, because I was using a self-hosted controller and I was using pfSense at the head end of the network, I had to set up all these networks and choose the third-party gateway option. Obviously, that's not what you want when you have the first-party gateway being the Unifi Dream Machine. The good news is that is really easy to change. Now, the lab ones, this is, if you followed my lab video, set up the same way because I do use other gateways on here. This is for all of my lab testing. But if you want to convert any of these from third-party gateway, meaning don't use the Unifi Dream Machine, to using the Unifi Dream Machine to be the gateway, they're completely convertible by clicking the router option and choosing the Dream Machine as the router. Matter of fact, it makes it really easy to apply all the firewall rules at the same time. So we're going to move over to the firewall rules next because that's actually really interesting and one of the big changes that Unifi made that makes this a whole lot easier. So I'm going to click cancel and let's go over to security because that's where all the firewall zones are. Now this is collapsible at the top. It's a small explainer to give you an idea of how the zone firewalls work. I'm going to do a more in-depth video in the future about this, but this is overall what makes Unifi so much better now than they were before is actually having a rational way to handle all the firewall rules. And the firewall rules get a little bit confusing at first, but once you get your head wrapped around zones, and it becomes actually easier to manage. It's just a different concept than the way it worked in pfSense. So we have this not safe for work networks and CamLAN. I actually probably could merge these into one, but I'm fine with keeping them separate. And if you scroll back up to your top, you'll see that my lab, my home things, which is going to be Chromecast and, well, things around the home, and CGNAT comes back to, if you're not familiar with why there's a CGNAT, watch my lab video. This is where I test other firewalls. So the lab stuff works, but I don't want it to be able to get back to what they refer to as the internal zones. So the internal zone is where Tom and his equipment lives, and I can break these down into several more networks. Matter of fact, let's just show you really quick that if you create a new network, you can choose the zone. And if I wanted to create another lab zone, I would just give it a name, and this would now belong to and have all of the rules of the lab zone. Or if I wanted to have all the rules of an internal zone or a DMZ zone. This makes it a lot easier when you're building network rules, because if I wanted to change policies, I don't have to create policies across all the different networks. I simply put those networks in that zone and all those policies apply. Now, something that may be confusing to people is the network policies as you view them here, because by default, when you create a new zone, it will have everything blocked, which is great. Block by default is a better security posture. That way you have to implicitly add everything. But among the things that are not added is allow the internal zones to talk to any of the new zones. They also end up with this allow to internal networks return traffic. And this is automatically created when you create a rule, because by default it's checked. So if we wanted the internal zones, as I did, to have access to these two zones here, the CamLAN and not safe for work networks, we can look at the policies. This is what the policy looks like. So it says allow to internal. So it allows internal to get to the not safe for network nets. And by default, this is checked. It says allow return traffic. Now, if you're wondering why there's an allow return traffic, that's because in the backend, Linux uses IP tables, or specifically the Unifi Dream Machine setup does. And IP tables, even if you have something that allows something go from one network to another, it doesn't allow return traffic by default. That's why that box is checked. So it does have to create two separate rules. In pfSense, or in more specifically the way FreeBSD and the pfFilter works, this is just assumed for simplicity that if you ask to reach out to something across another network, that you would automatically have a return route. So that's why it automatically creates this allow return traffic. And you can't edit this particular rule, but you can edit the rule that created it. Now, another feature that made Unifi much more usable is we go over here to routing and we find our DNS. And we have several records here for things that I have that are set up in my reverse proxy. Now, there'll be someone complaining that routing is not where DNS belongs, but that is where it is. And that is a challenge I've found, is just figuring out where things are, because I'm less familiar with the interface, but I've wanted to do this migration so I can become more familiar. Now let's talk about VPN. I really like the Teleport app. I think the simplicity of it is nice. It uses their Wi-Fi Man app to create a link and auto connect. So you load an app and it works, but it's only full tunnel. It works really well, but that full tunnel and no other options other than to revoke it kind of makes it a little bit limiting in my opinion. But you do have the option here to build a WireGuard, OpenVPN, or L2TP server, so you can have a more traditional VPN option if you'd like. That is fully supported here. As far as VPN clients, I have my privacy VPN, and I chose to use OpenVPN for simplicity to connect to my Toledo lab, where my other lab is at that office. One thing of note, and it has to be a specific rule for this, if we go here to security, we see that the Toledo VPN is tied to external. So I had to make sure there's a policy, because by default, when you add a VPN and use the UDM as a client to that VPN, it's adding it to the external routes that are accessible, which means all of these networks, such as CamLAN and NSFWNet, will also have the default external policy that allows them to route out it. The simple way to do this was to create a policy on each of these that says block going out that particular network. Matter of fact, I just told it to block out RFC 1918. Easy enough to add that rule. And because everything in this zone, or this zone here, I added a similar rule, this will work to stop any of those from routing out. Speaking of routing, one thing I really want to say is Unifi makes it substantially easier to set up privacy VPNs. So we'll click on this, and I just said route out PIA. I have the VPN already set up to connect to PIA, private internet access. They're a privacy VPN, and I say what to route, all traffic, or I can get specific, but then I want to edit and choose devices. I could choose entire networks, all devices, or I can get specific here. And the specific devices I wanted to route out was my TrueNAS Mini R, and I have a CASM system set up, KASM, but this allows these devices to have all their traffic tunneled out the privacy VPN. And by not checking the fallback box, that is essentially what we call in the pfSense world a kill switch. So if for some reason PAA goes down, it will stop letting these go out at all. And that is exactly what you want for most of your privacy VPN settings. That way, if the privacy VPN disconnects, you don't suddenly start routing traffic you didn't expect out your main gateway. Now, for those that follow the channel and know I was using a WireGuard site-to-site VPN previously to connect to my office in Toledo, well, that's one of the things not supported for site-to-site at this time. It's on the future roadmap, so I'll just give it a mention, but there's not any way to set up WireGuard as a client and get all the routing functions I need set up, or at least I'm not clever enough to do it. I couldn't find any documentation to make it work, even though I can go here and create a new WireGuard client as an option. I was not able to get it to route all of the traffic. Maybe I just don't know what I'm doing. I will let that be a possibility. OpenVPN to pfSense is dead easy as a client, because it's not doing site-to-site OpenVPN. It's doing OpenVPN as username and password. So it looks just like your system connecting, or a laptop or any remote device you have connecting to pfSense. Now, one big change, and something people requested frequently in pfSense that's just not available, but is available in Unifi, is application blocking and application tracking. So we have the ability to work at the device or network level, create different policies, and create specific apps or general groupings of apps that we want to block. So I can say, for example, let's select Facebook, hit save, and I can say block it for this network, or even select a specific device. like my phone, and this policy will now block Facebook on Tom's Pixel 9 phone. You can even do scheduling, weekly, daily, etc. This is really nice for those of you that are looking for this feature, and of course, quite a big upgrade because this is not a feature that was default built into pfSense. Now, going down on the security here, it does have intrusion prevention. They do have that option if you would like to upgrade to the higher end, essentially advanced detection through Proofpoint. That is an option, but not needed. You get your standard ET open rules for free still. You have the options in detection mode or notify and block. It's also kind of novel. I set this up if you want to have a honeypot. It will give you a notice. So you choose where you want the honeypot to be. If you're not familiar with honeypots, they're essentially ways to have a system that's looking for someone to scan it. And if someone that wasn't you is on your network scanning for things, well, you'll get an alert in the system. Now let's actually talk about that, because this is also where Unifi has improved things, is how things work in terms of the system log, where you can see critical notifications, admin activity, updates, and even the threats. For example, I was doing some honeypot triggering right here. But of course, more than just having all of this is going here to our settings, system, integrations, and this is where you can export to external servers. You can fully export Netflow, picking the networks. I don't have Netflow set up. I'll probably do that in a future video, but then we have the full activity logging, and it can be internally stored, or we can send it to an external server. Something I will note, and I've got a video on how to set up Graylog. I'm using Graylog for it right now, but I don't want it flooded. And what I mean by that is the firewall default policy, as in you want the entirety of all the firewall data to go there, you can do this and check this box. It will send all of the firewall data. That's wonderful if you have a system capable of ingesting all of it. I actually turned this off so the default policy isn't to send, but you can do on each individual rule you create a checkbox to send only those logs to there. So I like that they give you now granular control over how the data goes. By the way, all this other data, such as admin activity, clients, etc., all goes there. So when I do my future video on Graylog with Unifi, there's actually a lot more data that you have the ability to collect. So it's not just firewall information, but even the level of admin activity that's going on in the system, and security detections, devices, etc. Now, overall, I'm really happy with the Unifi Firewall and how they've progressed to where they are, but they still have some shortcomings. For example, if we go over here and we want to look at client devices, I like that I can go through, click on a client device, and see lots of details about that client device. I can test the latency, but when it comes to certain things, like under Insights, I would expect here to be not just the nice traffic data, but also more details about all the different connections. And I would expect under flows, for example, to not just show me some of these things that are blocked, but all the firewall connection details. There's not really any way to see that right now in the UI that I'm aware of. I believe it is on their future roadmap to integrate a lot more of that. So if you're trying to track down very specific connections, I mean, this is a much more advanced use case that not everyone would do. And yes, they have fully integrated packet capture, so I could easily get this with packet capture. I could easily get this through the firewall logs because they're being exported. I could easily get this through Netflow data because all the Netflow historical data can be sent to a Netflow collector. But I'm focusing on what is available here in the UI right now. Now, because it does run Linux underneath, if you are familiar with how to do things in Linux, you can SSH into the system. They're not locking you out of any of that and be able to find things. For example, I have contract, TAC L, TAC P, ICMP, destination 172.234.197.213. So if I look right now, there's no tracking of that because that doesn't exist yet. So what we're going to do is ping my forums. That happens to be the IP address of my forums. So as I'm pinging it, then we do the same thing. We now have it showing the ICMP traffic going from my system here to this destination. So you can do these type of tracking. That ability to do it is here inside the terminal. I'm just hoping more of it gets exposed in the UI. This is one thing that pfSense certainly has an advantage on, is easily through the UI being able to track the states, being able to track the connections, and filtering for them without having to rely on external. Of course, you can do packet capture net and dump it externally with pfSense as well. But of course, I love doing everything right in the UI. Now, Unifi does have the ability to do static routes, OSPF, and BGP. But in terms of showing those routes, at this time, I did not see this in the UI. But of course, once again, I can SSH in, type route, and I can see all the routes. Part of the reason this is very important to me is because I need to be able to see the routes that were brought in, for example, when I'm using it as a VPN client, because those routes don't show up at all in there because they're not ones I added. They were pulled in by the VPN. So I can see those extra routes right here, but not in the UI. This video is not an exhaustive list of everything Unifi versus pfSense. This is more about the migration process of me moving from pfSense over to Unifi. I have a video you'll find linked down below comparing pfSense and Unifi, and that video is still relevant here in February 2025 because I just did it recently, and it's all the different feature comparisons, but this was more about what that migration process looks like, and features as listed versus features as they actually work is what I was showing a little bit more in depth here. The other reason for me switching is not because I've abandoned pfSense or I'm never using it again. It's really about me getting deeper into the Unifi ecosystem because we've been consulting for years on Unifi access points and Unifi switches and lots of other Unifi things like their cameras, but their firewalls have always had just, well, too many shortcomings. And I would start down the path of working with them and be disappointed by something they couldn't do, or a client request would come in and they want to know which firewall to choose. And if it didn't have the features, well, I couldn't use it. Now, the Unifi firewalls have worked well for basic routing features, and security has been good on them. Just those extra features, like I'd shown, were kind of lacking, especially around the firewall. It was just so confusing setting up, and, well, making things harder to do things was not ideal. They are still rapidly progressing. I've been playing with some of the new releases that are coming out, but this, as I said, covered the system as it is today, and I'm pretty impressed with the firewall and the fact that it works for my setup and my environment, which I have a not overly complicated environment, but I have a video coming soon for a much more complicated environment that we've switched over to Unifi, and I've been, well, quite impressed with how well that has gone. So this is me adding another line that I want to get deeper into for the consulting that I do and projects we do for clients, and also bringing forth all the videos to you. Is using it and really testing things out is, well, way more than I can do in the lab. The lab only limits me so much to, well, I could probably try this scenario, but when the rubber hits the road, as they say, and you are really using it, then you get a better understanding of how these things work. And, well, like I said, I'll be doing some of these more in-depth videos, especially around how those zones work, because once I kind of wrap my head around it, I go, oh, that's how that works. And I've been getting a lot better at it and making sure I can be fluent at it so I can teach any of you who want to know how to set this up and also know if Unifi is a viable option. But what do you think? Leave those thoughts and comments down below. Oh, and for those that have been following the channel, what about my reverse proxy? Everyone has their favorites of Caddy or Traffic or several other ones that are out there. I just thought Nginx Proxy Manager was probably the easiest one to set up in Docker, so that's what I went with, because there's not a reverse proxy manager built into Unifi. Matter of fact, they still don't actually have an automated certificate management system right now to pull in Let's Encrypt, but hey, maybe in the future they will. Like and subscribe to see more content for the channel. Head over to my forums, forums.lawrencesystems.com. Do you have a more in-depth discussion about this and other topics? And I'll see you around. Connect me with whatever socials you'll find me on at lawrencesystems.com. Lawrence Systems thanks our sponsors for their support.